Well, this morning, the West woke up to news that Turkey had shot down a Russian fighter jet over its southern border, downing the Su-24. The fate of the two pilots still unknown, with unconfirmed and conflicting reports. We have special team coverage from around the world on this breaking story. Journalist Natalie Carney is on the border of Turkey and Syria, where the jet was shot down. RT's Medina Kochanova is in Moscow with harsh reaction from Russian President Vladimir Putin. Alexei Yarashevsky is live in Washington with reaction from the Western world. But we start first with RT's Manila Chan in our DC newsroom, who has the very latest. Manila, break down to me what happened this morning.
Well, the stunning news happened at about 9:24 a.m. local time in Turkey. A Russian Su-24 fighter jet was shot down in that mountainous border region of northern Syria and southern Turkey. Video of the downing seems to show two small parachutes springing from the plane as it went down on the Syrian side. However, unconfirmed reports and videos that I've seen purport to show the two pilots having been shot at during their descent, which may have ultimately killed them. However, Turkish officials are claiming that the two Russian pilots are still alive but in the hands of Syrian rebel groups. Contradictory information for now. Also, the debate over why Turkish fighter jets engaged was over airspace. Russian warplanes had been conducting missions in Syria. The jets drew near the Turkish border about a mile out, and that's about when Turkish F-16s fired. Turkey claims the jets were over their airspace and say they warned the Russian pilots up to 10 times within a 5-minute span as the jets approached, which indicate the Russian jets might have still been within Syrian territory. But according to a document obtained by WikiLeaks, Turkish officials writing to the UN Security Council after the downing, it stated that there were two Russian jets in their airspace. However, reports from Turkey say that the second jet observed the warning and vacated the airspace. Now, those at WikiLeaks, though, questioning the rest of the content in the document, doing the math on what Turkish officials have reported, that the Russian jets were flying at an altitude of 19,000 feet above their airspace for just 17 seconds. And radar information provided by Turkey themselves indicated that the Russian jets were heading southbound towards Syria. Now, Ankara claims that Russia has repeatedly violated their airspace before with no consequences. The debate over exactly where the ill-fated Su-24 was flying will continue. However, the international community can agree that even if the Russian jet was momentarily passing through their airspace, that the Russian jets posed no threat to Turkey. Now, it's nighttime there along the Syrian-Turkish border, so recovery efforts may prove difficult until morning. In Washington, Manila Chan, RT.
Well, journalist Natalie Carney joins us on the ground in Turkey near the Syrian border where the jet was shot down. Natalie, what can you tell us about what's going on the ground?
Well, it's clearly nightfall here on the Turkey-Syria border. I'm in the small town of Yelada, which is only a few kilometers away from where the Russian jet went down. And in fact, in the hills right in front of me, we've just seen what appear to be tracers from gunfire as the battle continues, rages on. As far as the mood and the sentiment here in Turkey, it's one of tension. People are quite concerned about what next. Where does this go? Turkey and Russia, which used to be very good friends, now have very strained relations. And part of that has to do with the increased airstrikes in this area right here, which is known to be home to Turkmen communities, which are basically descendants of Turks living in Syria. So Turkey is very sacred and very protective of these groups of people. The Prime Minister, Ahmet Davutoglu, did tell Russia at one point that there are no ISIL insurgents in this area, so please, no need to attack this area. However, Russia's situation in Syria does seem to continue. We spoke to a few people in the town of Yelada who actually said that some of the shrapnel from the jet reached the Turkish side, and so they're quite concerned that this could escalate into something much more serious and create further problems, not just in Turkey-Russian relations, but for the people living here on the ground. And there is actually refugee camps right along the border area here as well. So there's a lot of Syrian rebels and as well as Syrian civilians that are trying to escape the madness in neighboring Syria. So it's a very tense situation all around. There is military on the border crossing of Yellow-Dai, as that is an area that a lot of people are crossing over to get into Turkey for their safe haven. And while diplomatic relations between the two countries are souring, there are some questions about whether this will affect the economic relations. Of course, Turkey relies quite substantially on much of its natural gas imports from Russia. Russia itself has just won a contract from Turkey to build a multi-billion-dollar nuclear power plant here. So there's a lot at stake economically between these two countries. So as the days and the weeks go by, we're going to have to see if the diplomatic souring of relations affects the economic ones. For RT, I'm Natalie Carney in Yellow-Dai on the Turkey-Syria border.
Well, now let's head over to RT's Alexei Yarashevsky. Alexei, have U.S. leaders had anything to say about Turkey downing a Russian jet? Do they support the NATO member?
Well, the press conference after the meeting between the French President François Hollande and Barack Obama here in the White House was dominated by questions about the Russian jet. And right at the very beginning of the questions, President Obama had this to say about that.
Turkey, like every country, has a right to defend its territory and its airspace. I think it's very important right now for us to make sure that both the Russians and the Turks are talking to each other, find out exactly what happened, and take measures to discourage any kind of escalation. I do think that this points to an ongoing problem with the Russian operations, in the sense that they are operating very close to a Turkish border, and they are going after moderate opposition that are supported by not only Turkey but a wide range of countries. And if Russia is directing its energies towards Daesh and ISIL, some of those conflicts or potentials for mistakes or escalation are less likely to occur.
Well, we did hear the word mistake there in the context, but the notion that Turkey may have been defending itself prompted a question against what exactly, and whether Russian jets were posing any threat to the Turkish territory. My colleague Inet Chichikan went to the State Department briefing this morning trying to get an answer to this question from its spokesperson, and also reminding of a forgotten quote by the Prime Minister of Turkey. Let's listen.
You're saying Turkey has the right to defend itself. President Obama said the same thing. What defense are you talking about? Does anyone think Russia was going to attack Turkey?
Again, I mean,
Do you think so?
Look, I don't want to parse out this incident. I've said very clearly that we don't know all the facts yet. So for me to speak categorically about what happened is, frankly, would be irresponsible.
In 2012, Syria shut down a Turkish plane that reportedly strayed into its territory. Prime Minister Erdogan then said a short-term border violation can never be a pretext for an attack. Meanwhile, NATO has expressed its condemnation of Syria's attack, as well as strong support for Turkey. Do you see the inconsistency of NATO's response on this?
As to what President Erdogan may have said after that incident, I would refer you to him. We had... Again,
NATO's condemnation of Syria's attack, and the U.S. is part of NATO. So,
hold on. What you're talking about today, we said we're still gathering the facts. We're not ready to make a determination yet. It is part of what happens when you have another power operating on the border of a country, again, carrying out airstrikes that aren't part of the broader coalition efforts to counter ISIL. But I'm not going to make a determination, and I'm not going to talk about incidents that happened 3 or 4 years prior.
So Washington insists that things are not clear yet. At the same time, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that the Turkish version of the events is fully supported by the alliance. But I want to leave you with a sort of cherry on top, and it's not quite often we do this, but there was an interesting reaction in one of the U.S. media outlets. Now, Fox News invited a highly decorated retired U.S. Air Force general to talk about the incident, and the man lit up their broadcast with this statement.
So I don't really trust President Erdogan and what he's doing.
Okay.
I think we have to be very, very cautious on this.
Yep.
I think it was an overly aggressive maneuver.
Okay.
And as a NORAD region commander, we would not use these kind of rules of engagement. That had to be pre-planned.
Okay.
That airplane wasn't over Turkish territory long enough.
Long enough. Okay.
Well, that's RT correspondent Alexei Yarashevsky reporting in Washington. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin called Turkey's actions a stab in the back. RT's Medina Kochanova has more from Moscow.
Turkey backstabbed Russia by downing the Russian warplane and acted as accomplices of the terrorists. Well, that's the reaction coming from the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, in his comments, the president also gave some details on how exactly the plane was hit. Now, the plane was traveling at an altitude of around 6,000 meters and about a kilometer from the Turkish border over the Syrian territory, and it was hit by an air-to-air missile that was launched by a Turkish F-16 jet. Now, the crash site is also located some 4 kilometers from the Turkish border. And the president here stressed that the plane actually posed no threat to Turkish national security and that this particular incident will have some grave consequences for Russia's relations with Turkey.
Instead of immediately establishing contact with Russia, as far as I'm aware, the Turkish side contacted its NATO allies. Do they want NATO to serve the interests of ISIL?
We also heard some reaction coming from Russia's Foreign Affairs Ministry, directly from the minister, Sergei Lavrov, who has already cancelled his trip to Ankara that was due on Wednesday. And now the minister emphasized that the level of terror threat has increased and that the ministry now estimates the threats to be no less than in Egypt.
The Russian president has said that the incidents involving the shooting down of a Russian fighter jet by Turkey cannot go unnoticed for Russia-Turkish relations.
And here, Sergei Lavrov said that the ministry does not recommend Russian citizens to visit Turkey for holiday tourism or any other purposes. And this Tuesday, also, Russian state tourism agency Rostourism has also recommended suspending sales of holiday packages to Turkey. And right after that, one of the country's biggest tour operators, Natalie Tours, has already announced that it decided to temporarily suspend the sales of holiday packages to Russian citizens. And later on Tuesday, of course, we heard from the country's defense ministry. Now, the ministry said that it considers the attack of Turkish fighter jets on the Russian warplane an unfriendly act, and that it has already raised an official protest to Turkish military attaché. At the moment, Moscow plans to suspend military cooperation with Ankara and, of course, further measures to beef up Russian air base security in Syria will also be taken.